I'm also very aware, like Callan said, that Mother's Day isn't easy for some people. I talked to 2 mums already this morning who said, I didn't want to come, I nearly didn't come. So if you're one of those mums, thanks for coming. Because there are a lot of reasons why this is a painful day for people. But many of you are not mothers, because you're men. You never will be mothers. But we were all once children. And I'm really thankful that I am still the child of my mum. And my mum is in her 80th year. So to celebrate being in her 80th year, on Friday for cancer research, she did a parachute jump. So she did a parachute landing as well, thankfully. I'm cut from quite extraordinary cloth. My mum is somebody I admire a lot. I'm very proud of her. I told her, I'm very proud of you for doing that. And my sister Jane is in England at the moment, so she was there to watch this great event, as were the local paper and lots of other people, seeing her coming floating down out of 14,000 feet that she jumped from, apparently. So we do love to be watched. I'm glad Jane was there to watch her, and that was my mum liking to be watched. And in the video we heard about the child who liked to be watched. Every time you looked at her and said, hey mum, watch this, watch what I can do, look at me. And she looked every time, no matter what goofy thing you were doing, and you know you did some goofy things. We all know what that's like as a child, wanting to be seen by our mums. And we've also been the mum who wonders if she is ever seen, because there comes a point as a mum where you begin to think you're invisible. And Nicole Johnson has written a beautiful article. I'm just going to read a tiny little bit of it to you. It's called I'm Invisible. It all began to make sense. The blank stares, the lack of response, the way one of the kids will walk into the room while I'm on the phone and ask to be taken to the store. And inside I'm thinking, can't you see? I'm on the phone. Obviously not. No one can see if I'm on the phone or cooking or sweeping the floor or even standing on my head in the corner, because no one can see me at all. I'm invisible. Some days I'm only a pair of hands, nothing more. Can you fix this? Can you tie this? Can you open this? Some days I'm not a pair of hands. I'm not even a human being. I'm a clock to ask, what time is it? I'm a satellite guide to answer, what number is the Disney Channel? I'm a car to order. Right around 5:30, please. I was certain that these were the hands that once held books, and the eyes that studied history, and the mind that graduated. But now, they had all disappeared into the peanut butter, never to be seen again. She's going, she's going, she's gone. I don't know if you feel like that as a mum, but we're going to look in a Bible story at a mother and child and explore a truth that's relevant for all of us, not just for mothers. This is a story in Genesis 16, if you'd like to turn there. This is about a mother and child who both are misunderstood. While you're just turning there, let me read a little poem by a lady I know in England called Maureen Green. This shows what it's like to be misunderstood as a child. The other one was what it was like to be misunderstood as a mother. And this little poem is called What's Sex? What's sex, mummy? Asked little James. So, taking a big deep breath, I told him about the birds and the bees and animals and chimpanzees and human love and hugs and squeeze and everything like that. He listened quietly, and then he sighed and looked me in the eye. How do you fit that in this square? He held his painting in the air. Name, age, sex. It says just there. Ask your father, I replied. By now you're in Genesis 16, verse 1. Now Sarai, Abraham's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian maidservant named Hagar. So she said to Abraham, the Lord has kept me from having children. Go, sleep with my maidservant. Perhaps I can bring a family through her. Abraham agreed to what Sarai said. So after Abraham had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian maidservant Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Then Sarai said to Abram, "You're responsible for the wrong I'm suffering. I put my servant in your arms, and now that she knows she's pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me." "Your servant is in your hands," Abram said. "Do with her whatever you think best." Then Sarai mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going?" "I'm running away from my mistress Sarai," she answered. Then the angel of the Lord told her, "Go back to your mistress and submit to her." The angel added, "I will so increase your descendants that they will be too numerous to count." The angel of the Lord also said to her, "You are now with child, and you will have a son, and you shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery." Verse 13. She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her, "You are the God who sees me." For she said, "I have now seen the one who sees me." That's why the well was called Beer Lahai Roi. It's still there between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son that she had born. So in this story, we meet a mother called Hagar. She's an immigrant from Egypt, and she's a displaced person. She has very obviously no sense of belonging. She's running away from a household where her body has been used to produce offspring for an infertile couple. And like many daughters of Hagar to this very day, this Hagar is mistreated. She's trapped in a system where she feels as though she's invisible. She has no rights, she has no dignity, she has no freedom, she has no choice, and she's had enough. It's very hard to be a nobody with no name. She's always referred to by Abraham and Sarah as the maid or the Egyptian. And Sarah and Abraham probably did not really see Hagar as a person. She was just there to serve a purpose. And they probably haven't even noticed that she's actually run away. And it would seem to me that Hagar doesn't know what she wants. She knows what she doesn't want. She doesn't want to be treated as a non-person, as an invisible person. And she doesn't realize what her greatest need is until she meets the God who meets that need. And she names him. And she names him in verse 13, El Roi, the God who sees. I wonder what name you would give God if you had the chance to name him. The God who loves, the God who comforts, the God who guides, the God who forgives, the God of the second chance. Whatever you would choose would actually say as much about your need as it would about the character of God, because it's through our need that we experience God in our deepest way. And Hagar, who might feel insignificant and misunderstood, is actually a very significant person. Hagar has the longest conversation of any woman and almost of any man in the whole of the Old Testament with God. And Hagar, the Egyptian maid, is the only person in the Bible who gives God a name. Up to this point, God gave himself names. He introduced himself to the children of Israel as Elohim, the creator, Yahweh, the covenant maker, El Shaddai, the Almighty. These are vast, majestic, out there names of God. But Hagar needs more than a vast, majestic God out there, who she's probably heard about, but she doesn't know. She needs an intimate, personal God, and she meets that God. I have now seen the God who sees me, Hagar declares. And I've thought for a long time about why that statement is so important. And I want to spend the next few minutes looking at the importance of this statement. What difference does it make in my life to know that there is a God who sees me? What difference does that make as a mum, as a dad, as a man, as a woman, as a young person? These thoughts didn't start a couple of weeks ago. They actually started years and years ago when I was about 10 years old. I come to realize that I had some very deep questions inside myself, which children have, however little they may be. I wasn't brought up in a home that knew God or understood God or talked about God. And when I was 10 years old, I went into my room alone and I shut the door and I did a very simple experiment. I clicked my fingers and I looked around and I said, "Did anybody see that?" And I sat there, and because I heard no one answer, I came to the conclusion that there was no one there. It's very logical, it was very simple. I desperately wanted there to be somebody there, or I wouldn't have done that little experiment. But I then lived the rest of my teenage years as though there was no one there, and as though there was no God. When I was 10 years old, I really wanted to be seen. I wanted to know that somebody knew who I was inside that bedroom door. My parents were downstairs, I could hear their voices murmuring, and I knew they really didn't know who I was. Pearl S. Buck said, "I love people, I love my family, my children, but inside myself is a place where I live all alone." And I knew that place. I knew that feeling of aloneness. But I didn't know God and I didn't know the Bible. I had realized some things that are true in the Bible. 1 Samuel 16:7, man looks on the outward appearance. I'd realized that. I'd realized as a child when people looked at me, they often misjudged me. They often misunderstood me because they didn't know my motives. And probably one of the things that hurts me deepest to this day is when somebody judges me and they don't understand me and they don't know my motives. We all hate being misunderstood, and I wanted to believe and know that there was somebody who saw the inside of me and therefore someone who understood me. I didn't know the rest of that verse. Man looks on the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart, because I didn't know God. And of course, God is actually the only one who can see the heart. And it was many years later that I discovered God sees my secret world. God knows me. He knew me in that room, and God had even written about that moment in that room in his book, which I discovered when I came to read years later, Matthew chapter 6, verse 6. When you pray, go into your room, close the door. That's exactly what I'd done. This little experiment was just an attempt at prayer. And your Father who is unseen, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. I'd got that bit right. I'd gone in, I'd shut the door, I'd prayed. I'd sensed there was somebody who was unseen, but I'd never actually known that although he was unseen, he still was seeing me. We all have a fundamental need to be seen. That's why we say, "Watch me, Mummy, watch me, Daddy." We don't want anyone else to watch. We actually just want it to be my mum or my dad. I don't want my friend's mum coming to watch me play hockey. I want my mum coming to watch me play hockey. I can remember I used to help in the play school that Matthew went to when he was 3, and I remember I was on duty one day and I sat most of the morning with Matt's little friend Joshua, and Joshua was a very active little boy, and this morning he was very, very still and very, very focused, and he was building a rocket out of toilet rolls and yogurt pots, and he built this magnificent rocket, and he had just finished it when it came time for the end of play school. And all the kids were packing up, and he packed up, but he had his rocket, and everybody went, and Joshua was left there with his rocket, and finally his mum came flying in, and she was obviously late, and I don't know why she was delayed, but she was the last to arrive. And he just stood there, so excited to see her, and he held up his rocket to show her. And he said several times, "Mum, look at my rocket." And she never gave his rocket a first glance or even a second glance. She basically just said to him, "Hurry up, Joshua, I'm in a hurry." And she started heading out of the door. "Stop dawdling, Joshua, I'm in a hurry." And he's trailing along behind with his rocket. And as I watched him leave, I saw his shoulders slump, and I saw his rocket go down by his side, and he was just trailing it along, hanging limply there. And it no longer looked magnificent. It actually looked pretty worthless, which is just what Joshua felt, because all Joshua wanted his mum to do was look at his rocket. And maybe I saw myself in this mum, and it was a wake-up call for me, but I wanted to yell at her, and I wanted to say to her, Do you know how long it's taken for him to build the rocket? Do you know he's never been so focused in his life? I've never seen him this way. Do you know he actually built the rocket for you? Don't you see he built it for you? How hard would it be for you to stop for a moment and say, Joshua, that's fantastic? But of course she never said that. I played on a tennis team for many years, and I used to smile because one of the girls on that team had a mum. She was a farmer's wife, and she used to come to every match, and she'd lay out a tartan rug and get out a big flask of coffee because we played for a lot of hours, and she'd drink a coffee and watch the matches, and we'd kind of smile at the mum and smile at Sue, my friend, a little indulgently. But you know, we actually all wanted that mum. We wanted a mum who would put down what she was doing on a Saturday morning and say, you matter, I'm going to come and watch you play. And none of us ever, in all the years I played tennis, had a parent who came to watch us play tennis, except Sue's mum, sitting on the blanket, saying, today you're more important than anything else, and I'm here to see whether you win or not. I don't know if you saw the film Avatar. It's created quite a stir. It's raised millions. It's been acclaimed for being very creative and very thrilling, and it's also been slammed for being holistic and militaristic and pantheistic and political and pagan and many other things. But before you just slap an easy label on a film, it's good to look at the message of the film. And the message of the film, one of the messages of the film, is the cry of the human heart. The theme tune of Avatar is, I see you. I see you. That goes on the whole way through the film, and their lives only make sense when somebody sees their lives. William Timaeus said, you don't really understand human nature unless you know why a child on a merry-go-round will wave at his parents every time around, and why his parents will always wave back. Why do we need to be seen? Why do we long for a God who sees, and what difference does that make to us? It makes all the difference in the world, because to be seen is to be significant. It's to know our roots. Before I formed you, I saw you. My eyes saw your unformed body, Psalm 139, verse 16, God says. God saw us before anyone else did. He envisaged us into being, and once he envisaged us and created us, then he watches over what he's created, both humans and the beautiful planet which we're steadily destroying. I don't know what that makes you think, the idea of God watching over you, and I'm very sorry if you have this plaque hanging on the wall in your house which says, Christ is the head of this house, the unseen guest at every meal and the silent listener to every conversation. If you love that plaque, great, keep loving it. I actually think it's really creepy. It's as though Jesus is kind of sneaking around, you know. I'm going to say something and he's not going to like it. He says, I heard that. I saw that. I don't like that plaque. We don't have that plaque in our house. Do you know why we feel like that? Because we don't actually trust God. God's eyes are loving, and when we know that, we can relax in his presence. To be seen is to be significant, and to be seen is to be safe. Jeremiah 24 verse 6, my eyes will watch over them for their good. Jeremiah 24 verse 6, that's talking about the children of Israel when they were in exile. They were miles from home and thinking, maybe God doesn't know anymore, maybe God doesn't see us anymore. We sit down by the rivers of Babylon, they hung up their hearts and they wept. But my eyes see them, I'll watch over them. Last September, Matthew set off to drive to college, to drive to Winnipeg. It's a very long drive. About 2.5 days in his car that he'd just bought, which cost him $500. So, as we packed up the car, and it was kind of heaving at the seams with everything, and he set off down the road, I waved, and I watched until he got to the end of the road, and he turned left, and I could watch no more. And in my heart I thought, I can't see you anymore. I heard God say, I see him. I see him. A number of times I've felt I can't see my kids. And God says, I see them. What is it like to live under the gaze of a loving Heavenly Father? A loving gaze. I'm going to show you a video clip of Matt. You have to indulge me, this is Mother's Day, and we actually have only ever had a video camera in our family for one weekend. This is all the clip we've got. It's about an hour of footage of our whole family, and Hannah's 26 now, so we haven't got much. It's pretty precious. But I'm going to show you a clip which shows, it answers that question, what it looks like to see a child under the gaze of a loving Heavenly Father, trusting the one who's watching him. Let's just watch the clip. Sorry, Matt. That clip's probably not extraordinary to you because it's not your child, but I'll tell you what, it is extraordinary because Matthew was a very, very active child. He's still an active man, but he never sat still. He actually never stopped talking. And he found it really hard to focus on things, but under the gaze of his Heavenly Father he relaxes, and there's something very still about that footage. There's a beautiful verse in Zephaniah 3:17 which says, "He will take great delight in you, he will quiet you with his love." Do you know that feeling, to be quieted by the love of God, where you just dare to sit and be loved and be seen? And that's why I love that clip. To be seen is to be understood. Psalm 33 verses 13 to 15. The Lord looks down from heaven. He sees all the sons of men. From his dwelling place he looks out on all the inhabitants of the earth. He who fashions the hearts of them all, he who understands all their works. Psalm 33, 13 to 15. He understands. Matthew was trying to work out what he was doing, his works. He understands as he looks. To be seen is to be understood, and to be seen is to be encouraged. That verse I read you from Matthew chapter 6, verse 6, it says, "Your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you." Well, what will he reward us with? He'll reward us with his presence and his pleasure. You know that quotation, I'm sure, from Chariots of Fire, where Eric Liddell, the great runner, said, "I believe God made me for a purpose, but he also made me fast, and when I run, I feel his pleasure." I knew that before I even knew God, to run and feel his pleasure. I wonder when you feel his pleasure. When you're running, when you're doing something, I don't know what it is in your life, it's different for everybody, and you think, yes, this is who I was created to be. And something in you knows your Creator and the pleasure of your Creator. To be seen is to be significant, it's to be safe, it's to be understood, but it's to be free. Be free under the gaze of your Heavenly Father. I love this incident in 2 Samuel chapter 6 when David, he's now King David, is bringing the ark back to Jerusalem, and this is an amazing moment And David, the king, who had many people who looked to him and focused on him, he only looked to one person, and he looked to God, and he lived his life before an audience of one. And that meant when he brought the ark back to Jerusalem, because he knew how much it thrilled God, he danced for joy. And we read in 2 Samuel 6, verse 16, as the ark of the Lord was entering the city of David, Michal, daughter of Saul, watched from a window. And when she saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, she despised him in her heart. And then he goes back to face her. Verse 20, when David returned home to bless his household, Michal, daughter of Saul, came out to meet him and said, how the king of Israel has distinguished himself today, disrobing in the sight of the slave girls of his servants, as any vulgar fellow would. And David said to Michal, it was before the Lord, who chose me rather than your father or anyone from his house, when he appointed me ruler over the Lord's people Israel. I will celebrate before the Lord. I will become even more undignified than this, and I will be humiliated in my own eyes. But by these slave girls you spoke of, I will be held in honor. I think that's an amazing passage, because David doesn't mind what the crowds think, what they see. He doesn't mind what the slave girls think. He doesn't mind what his wife thinks. He doesn't even mind what he thinks about himself in his own eyes. Are you free before the Lord, or are you always bothering about what people think and your own view of yourself, which ties you in? I wonder if you've ever got over yourself, that you can just experience God's joy and got over yourself enough to step into things, not caring about what people are thinking, but just knowing this is before the Lord. He sees me. I'm going to show you another little video clip. This is of 3 children that you'll recognize, and they've got 2 little friends with them. I want you to see how free they become when they see their dad seeing them behind the video camera, and how giddy and goofy they get, because you can be giddy and goofy when you know your father loves you. Let's look at this clip for a moment. I didn't realize until I looked back at that clip that it's actually our children that dance, and the friends don't dance. They do a little thing, but they don't dance because it's not their dad watching. They probably dance in front of their own dad, but they don't dance in front of Hannah and Laura and Matt's dad. You see, when God delights in us, and we know that, we're free to dance. We're free to be goofy. And David danced. He danced before the Lord, and it was embarrassing to the people around him. But David's dance was an expression on earth of God's joy in heaven. The ark is coming back to Jerusalem. God doesn't shut us down. He releases us. He sees us. And to be seen is to be strengthened. 2 Chronicles 16:9, the eyes of the Lord move to and fro throughout the earth. Why? So he can bash you on the head? No. But he may strongly support those whose heart is completely his. I don't know if the thought of God seeing you makes you kind of cringe, or it gives you courage. For Hagar, it gave her courage. She did go back. She went to live in the home of Abraham and Sarah, and then her son grew up, and it became unbearable again, so she left again. I want you to turn to Genesis chapter 21. And now we see Hagar being met by God again, running away. And God opens her eyes to see something she didn't realize was there, which he always does. Genesis 21 verse 8. The child grew and was weaned, and on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. But Sarah saw the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking, and she said to Abraham, "Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance of my son Isaac." The matter distressed Abraham greatly. So he puts a little sort of lunch on the back of Hagar and sends her away. Verse 14, early the next morning, Abraham took some food and skin of water and gave them to Hagar, and he set them on her shoulders, and then he sent her off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went off and sat down nearby, about a bow shot away, for she thought, "I cannot watch the boy die." And she sat there nearby, she began to sob. I don't know if you with your children have got to the end of your resources and you feel all resources have run out and you can't do it anymore. You can't be the mum to the child. You can't provide what the child needs. That's this situation. Verse 17, God heard the boy crying, and the angel of the Lord called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What's the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand. I will make him into a great nation." And then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. And God was with the boy as he grew up. And he grew up in the desert because Hagar had discovered the source of life in the desert. God gave Hagar courage, and she discovered what it was to be strongly supported by God. When no one else knows, and no one else cares, and no one else sees, and no one else helps, God sees. And to be seen is to be known. And most of us, when we come to God, we look back at our lives and our kind of fumbling journey towards God, and we can pinpoint times when we realized He was watching over us, even though we weren't necessarily aware of that at the time. We worship a God who sees, and I think the truth of this really hit home to me last November when a team of us went to India, and we went into the brothels in Calcutta. I think they have to be some of the darkest, saddest places on earth, certainly that I've ever been in. And they're filled with unseen women. They're seen when they come to their lanes, and they line up, and the men walk past and pick the prettiest ones. Then they're seen. Oh, the ugly ones aren't seen. They walk past those to find the prettiest ones. Then they're seen. But they're not really seen. Just the outside of them. They're not seen when they weep, as a girl did who I sat on the floor with in her room where she serves her customers because her mother has died. And she's from Bangladesh and she can't get home. She has no money. They don't see that side of the women. They don't see what's gone on in the heart of one of the women who would walk past the day before, who cover herself the next day in gasoline and set light to herself because she could not bear her life. This was a mother living in a brothel, earning money to bring up her child, and she died. She died the next day and left the child. And you might say, how come if they're seen by the God who sees, how come He doesn't do anything? Well, He does, because we're the body of Christ. So when God sees pain, He looks for somebody to work through, and that somebody, in this case, is Monique Shaw, who's a part of this church. And so He sends Monique to see these women as He sees them. And I got the chance to speak to these women one day at this amazing party that we held for them, these prostituted women who are surrounded by idols, and I read to them from Isaiah 44, verse 17 to 18. The idols do not see you, their eyes are plastered over so they cannot see. These women are worshipping gods who don't see them. They don't see them, and they're sacrificing their lives. But you're not invisible, and neither is God. And that's what Hagar discovered when she fled into the desert. He sees me. He knows my name. Just because you can't see God doesn't mean that He's not there. And just because you think He's not there doesn't mean He doesn't see you. And just because I can't see Him doing anything immediately does not mean He's not doing something. To be seen does not mean you don't have problems, that you don't fall. The Bible does not say no sparrow falls. It says he sees the sparrow that falls. And falling is part of life. God can't stop everything that hurts us. We chose to have our own independence and to live with free will, and that's where we now live. When we stepped outside what was best for us, we knew it and we hid ourselves so God wouldn't see us. But of course, God still sees us. And that means we get hurt and other people get hurt, and God doesn't prevent that hurt necessarily, but he always provides the possibility of healing, even if it comes many, many years later, because God is watching over us. And he loves every person who he's created, and that means you, and it means me. To be seen is to be loved, and God looks on us with love. He can't force us. When the rich young ruler came to him and Jesus basically said, you love your money too much, it plays too important a part in your life. Here's your choice. He made his choice, he turned away, he walked away, and Jesus looked on him and loved him. But he didn't force him to come back. He saw the crowds. He wept over Jerusalem. He longed to gather Jerusalem. He saw them, but they didn't come to him. And although Jesus was physically present, many people still did not see him with the eyes that Hagar saw God. The Jews had always known no one can see God and live. So when Jesus stood up and said, anyone who sees me has seen the Father. You want to know what God's like? Look at me. Some of them took a lot of convincing, and after he had died and they didn't know he'd been risen from the dead, Thomas, hurt, angry, betrayed. Where is he now? What's all this come to? He said, unless I see his hands, I will not believe. In that statement lies a mystery, because pain and wounds and anger can actually prevent us seeing God, but they can also be the reason for seeing God. You know the story of Job. Job went through unimaginable pain. He lost all his children, all his possessions, everything. But at the end of it all, in Job 42 verse 6, he said, my ears had heard of you, and all of us, our ears have heard of him. But now my eyes have seen you. Because of the pain, he actually saw God. How about you? Is your pain stopping you seeing God, like Mary in the garden, who was crying so hard? It's such an irony. She was crying so hard she couldn't see Jesus, and he was standing right next to her. And maybe that's you. Unless I see, Thomas said. There is no doubt that he sees us. He sees you. So what difference does it make in your life and in my life that he sees me? Well, we've looked at the difference. It means we're significant, we're special, we're safe, we're understood, we're encouraged, we're strengthened, we're free, we're known, we still fall over, we're loved. But what difference does all this make in our lives? Let me put this as plainly as I can. It makes absolutely no difference. Unless you look back. No difference. Unless you actually meet his gaze now in life. The Bible tells us one day every eye will see him. The whole world will see Jesus. But what are we waiting for? What more does God have to do than he's done? God has nothing else he can do. God so loved the world, he sent his Son. Anyone who's seen me has seen the Father. How life-changing it is to go into every day knowing I can see the God who sees me. He guards me as the apple of his eye. And remarkably, Psalm 32 verse 8 says, I will instruct you and teach you in the way you shall go. I will guide you with my eye. What does that mean? He will guide us with his eye. It took me months to understand, just letting this sit with me, what that means. It means God will guide us with his eye, but he cannot do that unless I look back. If I look back and I look into his eye, I see where he's looking, how he's looking, who he's focused on. The women hidden away in the brothels in Calcutta, Monique Shaw looked into the face of God. Where is God looking? Where is God loving? Oh, it's there. Okay, I'm going. And now I see. He guides me with his eye. There is so much suffering in the world. But God is doing something. Are we being guided by his eye as we look back? It's so easy to miss the people who God is looking at and loving. The disciples went to find food one day while Jesus sat on a well and talked to a Samaritan woman, and they must have passed her. They must have passed her coming to the well as they went to the town, and they missed her. And when they got back, Jesus said, look at the fields, they're ripe unto the harvest. Open your eyes and look. You've all just been so busy about getting to the market that you just missed somebody. Oh, no, you saw her, that's right. But you didn't see her with my eyes, you saw her with yours. And they judged her because she's Samaritan and she's a woman, and so you didn't see her. Open your eyes and look. And Jesus sees the person in the crowd who longs to be seen, who longs to be known. And he only asks one thing of you and me. I see you, he says. You? Look at me. Look at me. And God, to enable us to see him, raised him high on a cross. We don't have to climb into a tree like Zacchaeus did, hidden, but so he could peek down and see Jesus, because he died on a tree. Jesus was raised up high. If I be lifted up, will draw all men unto me. You cannot help but see him on the cross. He was lifted up in the cross so everybody could see, just like the children of Israel had to look at a snake lifted on a pole in the desert to be healed. That was the only way. If they didn't, because they were too proud or they were too busy or they thought, how silly, there's got to be another way. I'm not looking at a snake on a pole. That's the way, God said. Look and you will live. Don't look and you will die. And that's exactly what happened in the desert. The people who looked lived, and the people who didn't, their bodies were strewn all over the desert. Look, I am the way, the truth, and the life. I think one of my favorite moments in all of Scripture is when Peter, who has watched Jesus being arrested and taken away, and all the disciples have run away, comes back and he follows at a distance. There are so many disciples who are following at a distance. Peter thought he couldn't be seen, but he still wanted to see Jesus. He just didn't want to stand out and stand up for him. And there comes a moment where he's denied him 3 times to 3 strangers who said, surely you're one of his disciples. You know, when you're a disciple of Christ, whether you like it or not, you have the life of Christ in you. Even when you think you're hiding in the crowd, and even when you're warming your hands on the fire of people who don't know Jesus and don't love him, they can see that you're his disciple. They can see that. And so when Peter is accused of being a disciple, he says, man, I don't know what you're talking about. And at that moment, Jesus is being taken from one trial to another, and he walks past Peter. Just as he was speaking, the rooster crowed. Luke 22 verse 60, and the Lord turned and looked at Peter. And Peter remembered the word the Lord had spoken to him, before the rooster crows today, you will disown me 3 times. And he went out and he wept bitterly. What do you imagine that look of Jesus said to Peter? Do you imagine it said, I knew you'd fail, Peter. You've let me down, Peter. I hate you, Peter. I'm done with you, Peter. Absolutely not. If you think that's what the look said, then that probably speaks more about you than the one who sees, the Jesus who sees. I believe that the look said, I knew you'd fail, Peter. I love you, Peter. And more than that, Peter, I know you still love me. And I'm looking at you, and you've looked back at me, and we're still in business. Have you ever wondered, when you've read that account, how we know that Jesus looked at Peter? It's so simple, because Peter looked back. That's how we know. If he hadn't looked back, he wouldn't have seen that Jesus was looking at him. And Peter had failed, and Peter had disappointed himself, and he'd denied Jesus, and he'd betrayed Jesus, and he'd momentarily taken his eyes off Jesus. But guess what? Jesus had never taken his eyes off Peter. There's that old song, I've never sung it, it's too good to be true, can't take my eyes off of you. And that's what God says, he can't. He can't take his eyes off you. He can't take his eyes off me. He made you, he loved you, he sees you. Have you looked back? Have you fixed your eyes on Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith? Or are your eyes still wandering around the world looking for all the things that glitter so brightly? Because it's the eyes that draw us away from looking back. And whether you like it or not, and whether you believe it or not, and whether you want it or not, God sees you today. And he sees you with a look of love. And you can see him, not literally, of course, but with eyes of faith, with eyes that look into this book and meet him, the living word in the written word. And God knew we wouldn't be able to see him, literally. John 20, verse 29, blessed are those who have not seen, yet believe. What difference does that make? What difference does that make in our lives that God sees us today as you drive your car away from here, as you go to bed tonight, as you get up tomorrow morning? God sees me as you live your life, as you choose your career, as you function as a mum, as you go into a marriage, the day you walk down the aisle and get married. God sees me. The day you die in that hospital bed when nobody knows and nobody understands, God sees me. When you see, you believe. When you believe, you see. And Hagar had longed to be seen, and she met the God who sees. And it's ironic to me, it was almost like a prophecy. I've seen the God who sees me from Hagar, because the daughters of Hagar are still invisible. All over the world they're covered from head to foot in black, with a little slit that they look out of. In one country they're covered in light blue. Peeping out, they can't be seen. I'm sure they still long to be seen. Callan's going to play a song with Jared for us, and while he does, I just want you to dare to sit there and be loved and be seen by God, and think about the implications of that in your life. But I also want you to consider praying for daughters of Hagar. I didn't know why God embedded this message in me. He did it one night, and I woke up in the morning and just wrote it all down about 4 months ago. But then this week my daughter sent me an email, and we're going to put up a slide, PowerPoint on the screen, and you'll see what this week is. This is the month of prayer for Muslim women who are still asking, do you see me? Ephesians 1:18 is my prayer. I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened, in order that you may know the hope to which he has called you, the riches of his glorious inheritance in his people, and his incomparable great power for us who believes. I have now seen the God who sees me.
I have a maker. He formed my heart before even time began. My life was in his hands. I have a Father. He calls me his own. He'll never leave me, no matter where I go. He knows my name. He knows my every thought. He sees each tear that falls and hears me when I call. Sing this with us. I have a maker. I have a maker. He formed my heart before even time began. My life was in his hands. I have a Father. I have a Father. He calls me his own. He'll never leave me, no matter where I go. He knows my name, and he knows my name. He knows my every thought. He sees each tear that falls and hears me when I call. He knows my name. He knows my name. He knows my name.
I see the God who sees me. Question is whether we're returning the gaze and we're looking back and we see him and we know that we're known and we know that we're loved and we know that we're significant. And maybe for some of us this morning, God has spoken to you in a way that has been clear. And you need to open your heart